sense of soul.
Hey Soul Seekers, it's Shanna. Journey with me to discover how people around the world awaken to their true sense of soul. Now go grab your coffee. Open your mind, heart, and soul.
It's time to awaken.
Today on Sense of Soul, I have Dr. Kate Cherrell. She is a writer and broadcaster specializing in paranormal history of the 19th century, spiritualism, and British folklore. She is the author of the Gothic novel Begotten, written in Gothic and ghost story traditions. Begotten's dark and sometimes humorous narratives raises questions about the trustworthiness of one's senses and the very nature of ghosts. And you can watch Dr. Kate. She has hosted Haunted Homecoming with Jack Osbourne and Jonathan Ross, Unexplained, Caught on Camera, the Yorkshire Exorcist II, just to name a few. She has received the GPN Top Investigator Award in May of 2025 for her work in paranormal investigation and the very nature of ghosts. Dr. Kate is joining us today to share with us her paranormal expertise. Please welcome Dr. Kate Cherrell. I'm excited to hear about your book and about all the things you're doing. And how did you get into this? Tell me about your journey. What led you here?
Yeah. I really keep thinking I should have some very neat little snappy soundbitey way of describing things. But I think my journey, as I understand it now, has been delightfully messy, and I'm very grateful for that mess. I think things that are linear are often not really worth pursuing, I suppose. But when it comes to, let's say broadly, the paranormal, the supernatural, things that are rather more left field, I think like many of us, I had a childhood interest in things that are a little bit spooky, things like the paranormal and particularly ghosts, psychics, even aliens. It was the 90s. I think you couldn't leave the house before you were hit in the face with an X-Files advertisement. So, that was kind of inevitable. But I was very fortunate to be raised partially by my grandparents, and my granddad was a very ordinary man, real northern working class, but with this amazing little hidden spiritual side to him. And while everyone else was just, going about their business, this was Grimsby, it's a fishing town, he was nurturing this kind of secret interest in the spiritual and particularly in the idea of like guardian spirits and things like that. So he very much nurtured those things in me, the whole gamut of things that are completely ridiculous through to quite pleasant ideas of having ancestors watching over you. And so it was really through him that I was able to continue the sort of interest that ordinarily would have stopped when I was a child. So I'd go to the local cemetery with him to visit my deceased ancestors twice a week, every week. Understandably, I wasn't very popular at school. How shocking with that.
You were like Wednesday and
oh, completely, but way before it was cool. But yeah, then from that, I had some strange experiences that I couldn't explain. I still can't explain at when I was spending a lot of time at my sister's house. I'd now say that was traditionally, we'd call it haunted, I suppose. And then after that, everything sort of combined, and I started pursuing an interest in it, not just for personal growth, but academically. And so that's when I started looking into the spiritualist movement, and certainly how the Victorians, or in the long 19th century, we interacted with death, memorialization, ideas of the afterlife, and how our ideas of magic and metaphysics started to really change around that era. And I pursued that through the academic route. I went and got my BA. I've got about to have 2 MAs, which is, everyone needs a hobby. Mine just seems to be more ridiculous than most. And then I got a PhD a couple of years ago. And fortunately, I'm now a full-time writer about the paranormal. So I write for magazines, for different publishers. I've just published my first novel, and I've done a lot of TV as well, a lot of television shows relating to the paranormal. I've done the traditional ghost hunting, screaming at mirrors
Yeah.
kind of routine. So I'm very fortunate that a childhood interest has bloomed into something that's all consuming in a very delightful way, in a very enjoyable way. And I'm continuing to grow and learn in that. And through my work in books, in magazines, and TV, and all the rest of it, I'm able to share that with other people. So I'm in a very fortunate position, I feel.
Gosh, I love a good ghost story, right? When you're
Oh
little
yeah.
with all the girls sitting around just trying to scare the shit out of each other.
Yeah.
And which is, I guess there is that excitement kind of that you get from it, but there's also adrenaline, I guess.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've described paranormal investigation before a little bit like being an adrenaline junkie. So it's that same thing. It's the same reason why we get rushes from ghost stories. Like you see, it's like a safe risk
Mm.
because we're still sat still. We're not going cave diving or anything too crazy like that, but it still could be real. We still could be inviting it in. So we get that little rush. And I think whether you're reading ghost stories, whether you're telling ghost stories, or if you're out in the field trying to see if there's anything there, you're all chasing that same thrill. Obviously overarching, there's the nice idea that we're all going to learn more about how we interact with the world. But I think a lot of it is just we want a quick kick.
Yeah.
And
So I'm originally from Louisiana. I'm from New Orleans, which is
Mhm.
known to be it's
Oh
historically
yeah.
known to be very haunted. In fact, when you're walking around the French Quarter, often you'll see like for sale and it'll say like haunted or not haunted on the for sale
Yes.
sign because it is so known for being so active. And I mean, there's many ghost tours and
Mm.
so many stories of
Oh
scary
yeah.
stories. And it is kind of from an era, right?
Yeah.
And New Orleans is one of the oldest places here on our side of the pond. And my family has been rooted back into the late 1600s, early 1700s. And when I was doing my ancestry, which I'm an ancestral genealogist,
Oh
when I was
wow.
doing mine was so just full of ghost stories and interesting
Oh
history.
amazing.
Yeah. But I mean, it was like the stories of vampires, how that started in New Orleans was in my tree. I mean, it goes back to real
Oh my God.
historical events that are kind of told over time and get a little darker and darker, right? And, Anne Rice, who lived in the French Quarter, who lived right across the street from where my mom went to school, she must have heard these stories as well, writing
Mm.
all of her books on vampires in New Orleans. And one of them was about when the first settlers went there, most of them were men. And they
Mm.
needed some women if they were going to populate this new land. And so they sent over, which is in French, it was called something else, but it was the king's daughters, is what they called them.
Yes.
They sent
Yeah. Yeah.
over women. They put them on a boat, which would take 2 months to get across the transatlantic. And they're going to stay in the Ursuline convent, which is where my mom actually went to school there. It was St. Mary's Italian when she was younger, right in the heart of the French Quarter. And these girls show up at night. They'd been on this boat for 2 months, sickly, and the nuns give them fresh white gowns, and all of their belongings are all on the levee or off the Mississippi River, and they're in these long pine boxes. And they were so excited. They wanted to venture out, even though it was the middle of the night. So all of a sudden, there's all these pale women walking in their white gowns, down the street of the French Quarter, they say, where the story is rooted from of vampires.
Yeah. Yeah. Certainly. Vampires in. I really struggle to say New Orleans because obviously being
No, you
English, I'm
say
like
it
New
good.
Orleans. It's New
Very,
Orleans.
very good. It's New
Sorry, New
Orleans.
Orleans.
Yeah.
Yeah. What they called like something like the Casket
Yes,
Princesses
the
or something like
casket
that.
girls, or
Or the
yeah, they're
Casket
called
Girls.
many names. Yeah.
Well, I certainly grew up with a lot of Anne Rice books and really idolizing Louisiana as this amazing hub of vampiric
Mhm.
activity. And certainly I got into a lot of Poppy Z. Bright's novels, like Lost Souls is set
Yeah.
in New Orleans as well. And honestly, I don't know who I'd be without that novel. I'd be a lot less of a cliche if I hadn't spent my teenage years obsessing over that. But I love places like that, places like New Orleans and the French Quarter, where there's so many layers of history that are interwoven with folklore that the whole town becomes indivisible from this oral history, whether it's ghosts, whether it's vampires, whether it's voodoo, whether it's different kinds of folk beliefs that have been imported or homegrown. I think it just makes for the most rich
Yeah.
and exciting landscape. So I can imagine growing up in an area like that. It must have been, yeah, something else compared to certainly where I grew up, where it was kind of a fish and death. That were your two options, really.
Right. Well, and I also have Marie Laveau in my ancestral tree twice, actually, as an aunt. And so,
Wow.
but growing up, I thought, she was the boogeyman, but doing real research,
Yeah, yeah,
historical research, reading her obituaries and learning and following her trail, I mean,
mm,
well, actually, it was her grandmother actually bought them out of slavery under the Spanish rule. I mean, just seeing how very powerful that feminine energy,
absolutely.
but it
Yeah,
wasn't really told to me. So it was something that I rediscovered. And I love her story. And, she was really nothing more than an herbalist who, would sit with the
yeah,
sick and pray with prisoners and was actually feared, which was pretty amazing to
yeah.
be a woman of color feared.
Absolutely. And I think it's so amazing when you look back on, like you say, these characters, these lived experiences, these women that we see traditionally as
Yeah.
monsters or boogeymen. And then you look back and you think, oh no, these are just very powerful women that have essentially subverted male authority in some capacity. And if it's anything spiritual, if there's anything to do with healing, anything physical, it's seen as they're lesser women, they're other women because they've subverted this power from the men around them, and therefore they're ironically they're a threat. And so
Right.
yeah, that leads to a really uncomfortable legacy that I love seeing that we're deconstructing now, that we're
Right.
reassessing these women's places in paranormal history, supernatural history, and
Right.
folk history. Certainly, yeah, yeah.
Look at all of the witches, right? And the witch trials. It really going through ancestry and working with hundreds of trees, my perception on a lot of the hauntings and the scary stories and of witches and all these things have changed so much because I've learned true history, but I see how the
Yeah.
story is like the fishtail that grows and grows and grows. And, you know, I have an idea that if the majority of us think something, well, then it will be, kind of like COVID,
Mm,
right? That was
yeah,
like a perfect example of how very powerful as like a whole, as a collective. We had all this fear, and it was almost like we were feeding this virus
mm,
that got bigger and bigger. I feel the same way about like the story of the Baphomet, which was
mm,
originally created just to be a being that was equal, showing equal sides. But then Arthur Waite used it as the devil card in the tarot. So this now became the devil. And so I think that it's interesting to hear about stories, and how, like, what was the historical truth of that story and how
mm,
much have we manifested it to actually be this monster. And I have actually had
yeah.
paranormal investigators on before who talked about, I think it was in Canada, where they made up a ghost story and it
Mm.
actually was created.
Oh, like the Philip experiment.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. It's amazing. I think, like you say, the power of collective thought and the power of collective belief can't
Yes.
be underestimated because as much as it can cause hysteria, it can cause collective fear, and then
Absolutely
that
good.
reverberates generationally, reverberates culturally. At the same time, it with experiments like the Philip experiment, which arguably was flawed, if it was recreated under the same university conditions, I'd be far more interested to see what happened there. But essentially, yeah, it was a load of people that were repeatedly brought back to the same place. They said, I think was it a 16th century Englishman that
and
they
there was
were
a
meant
whole
to be
dramatized
concocting.
story.
Yeah, they created this full background, and then they found themselves being able to communicate with him. But that's so interesting. It's are we creating a consciousness? Are we communicating with something that is intelligent, something that can send responses? Or can group delusion be that powerful and that strong that we can all align on the same wavelength and give exactly the same answers? It's kind of terrifying. I find it's the power of the mind, and certainly the power of the paranormal. Right. Even if we accept that it's entirely just happening in our own minds and there's absolutely nothing to it, it's still such a powerful tool. Yeah, I think it definitely can't be underestimated. And certainly in any seance environment, or any environment where you feel like you're messing with, and I say messing because that phrase always comes into it, you're messing with things you don't understand, you're messing with things you can't control. I think whenever you're fed that narrative, there's always the chance that something more insidious will come out of that, whether or not that's the reality or not. But the very thought that you're out of your depth can wheedle into yourself and have more long lasting consequences, I think.
Well, I would also say that I know that in real life, I kind of attract people like me, kind of like this resonance with energy, right? You attract like energy.
Yeah.
So I've always had this thought that, and I've heard this before, like if there's a lot of fighting in a household, right, this can cause like a lot of energy. Or if you're in a good place or a bad place, maybe these are the kind of energies that you're going to be presented with. What do you
Yeah. I do think like attracts like, and I think not necessarily in the best way. I know I personally wish I was a far more optimistic person. I'm trying. I want to be the Brady Bunch. I want to be skipping through the woods wearing flower crowns and saying everything's okay. But I think it's in my blood to be quite pessimistic and quite defeatist, which is horrible. I don't want to be that person, but I don't know. I'll blame some ancestor somewhere down the line. It's probably them being glum. But certainly when I'm going through life thinking, oh, nothing's happening, I'm not getting this, this isn't going my way, I'm almost putting that out there. So even subconsciously, then I won't be attracting positive things, because why on earth would positive things be attracted to someone who's already failed before they've even got out of bed? Right. Because mentally, I think the power of the mind and what you put out there, whether that's through energy, whether that's through something else, some other kind of energy, of electricity that you're putting out there, I think it's something to be very, very mindful of. And while I'm not especially a full signed up member of ideas of manifestation, like if I think of something long enough, it'll happen, I do think there's something in there, in that if you leave yourself open to possibilities, and don't get in your head too much, don't overthink. I think there's different ways of doing it. I think if you're open to opportunities, if you're open to meeting people and to having yourself changed, it's that openness to change and to having yourself questioned that brings the most exciting and the most fulfilling interactions. So I don't necessarily think that we have to be happy clappy skipping rainbows people, but certainly being open to being changed, I think.
Are you a good witch or you're a bad witch?
Yeah. Or are you just present?
Right.
Yeah.
I've also heard a lot over the years that location can be a big deal, right? And I'm here in Colorado. So I've been living in Colorado most of my life, actually. My family moved here when I was younger. And we have the Stanley Hotel, which The Shining was.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Right, red rum, which is, that one's scary to me. And it's on top of, though, quartz. I've heard this about other places. I want to say Gettysburg. Gettysburg is like on top of limestone or something like that. So it seems to be that a lot of hot spots that are like holding this residual energy, or these lost souls, or however you look at it. What do you think about that?
I think I'm very interested in that. I'm very interested in, I'd separate it into what we'd call kind of the place memory hypothesis. I think a lot of both of those things, the idea that places can hold memories or energies, and that particular stones can hold memories and energies. Personally, I'd separate them into kind of like place memory hypothesis, which is often just called the stone tape theory, after the Nigel Neal film of the 70s, which is fabulous, but oh my god, so much screaming. But there's the idea that places that are heavy with quartz, and quartz in particular, I find really, really interesting, because it's in the late 70s in Northumberland, a place called Hexham in Northumberland. There were two small stone heads. They look like Celtic stone heads, really rudimentary, carved little. Just these little heads were found at the end of someone's garden. And I feel like this encapsulates all the arguments around places and rocks holding memories. So these heads were found, and obviously local newspapers were saying, oh, there's this an amazing archaeological find. But then when they brought the heads into the house, they were saying that these really strange things are happening. We're having things being thrown around, like typical poltergeist activity. Then they ended up saying, well, there was this like half man, half beast thing that started roaming around the local town, that people started seeing these werewolves. It escalated so quickly. And then the heads were taken into ownership by this professor of Celtic studies. And her and her daughter reported having these strange poltergeist experiences and werewolf experiences in the house. So there was a lot of strange animalistic things happening, a lot of very destructive things happening because of these heads. Now, at the time, they thought they were ancient stone heads. So the more esoteric side of things were thinking, well, perhaps there is some kind of ancient force attached to it, some kind of ancient force, some kind of ancient evil. But then someone else came to the newspaper and said, they're not ancient heads. I made those for my daughter. I work at a concrete firm, and I carved them for my daughter. I can show you. Because there were three, and she lost one in the garden. The other two have just been kicking around there. Let me show you, I'll make another one. And this was the Craigie family. I think it was Donald Craigie. And so he went to the papers when this story of werewolves and poltergeist was getting to a national level, that this guy just said, this is getting silly now. This is what happened. But that didn't stop the story, and it didn't stop the reports of experiences. And so there's a lot that you can unpack there, because Hexham itself has this really rich history of not only Celtic heads, but of reports of beasts, a bit like black shuck type things, big black dogs that are hellhounds, things like that. And so could these heads have been carved by this man, if we accept that he did them, while they were in the ground? Could they have absorbed some kind of latent power of the surrounding area? And although they were facsimiles of Celtic heads, could they then be these powerful supernatural objects? Is it just by association? But also, when they went into the house and all this phenomena was said to happen, was it fake? Was it projected? Did they become haunted?
I actually have a werewolf story in my ancestry. He was known as the Loup-garou. So family was from right at the bottom of the now Gulf of America.
Yeah, okay.
And right there on the Gulf, and they were a little fishing community, and they'd been there from the beginning. And it was said that this priest had hurt one of the children in their community, and the parents got together and they killed the priest. This is the story that was passed down. And then it said that he turned into some werewolf, and they called him the Loup-garou, and he would, in the night, scare little children. And so I thought that was really interesting, because, it was the only story. I mean, I literally have it all in my tree when it comes to
You do. You're ticking off that bingo card, aren't you? Like everything.
But there you go, though. I mean, it's a story, but when I was little, and I never heard the story before. I didn't hear the story until I did my ancestry. And one of my very first dreams as a child that was a reoccurring dream was of this huge werewolf. And he was purple, and it would scare me. I was like about 7, 8 years old. I thought, oh my gosh, like, is it in our DNA? Like, do we
Yeah,
hold, some of the memories and stories that have been told?
yeah. It's pause for thought, isn't it? It really is. Yeah, I think the ways in which memories can be stored or energy can be stored is very interesting. I don't really have any thoughts on how
Hmm.
they would remain within families. I wish I had, again, a very neat theory. But I do find it interesting how we find commonalities from
Mm.
deep in our histories. But yeah, I think certainly with place and place memory, I do think that, like an extreme fear, like a fear of a werewolf, can be imprinted as an energy. And whether or not that means that people can then tap into it and people can communicate with it, and that's another thing. But I certainly feel like if you have an extreme experience, generally of fear, maybe of joy, but I think fear is the more common of the extreme emotions. Then I feel like you can, almost like stamping a passport, you can leave an impression unwillingly, and that exists separate from yourself. Like your
Mm.
consciousness can go on in your body and go on and do whatever it is you want to do in your life, but a part of you has been almost like copied, like a blueprint,
Printed.
and is
Yeah.
just added to the scrapbook of that place. And I find that very interesting. I've certainly come across a lot of experiences and reports of those sort of phenomena in my years of looking at the paranormal and visiting haunted sites and things like that. Is that
Yeah.
sometimes these extreme feelings, these extreme fears that are said to leave impressions on a place, aren't always the result of someone dying there or something,
Mm.
really bloody and grim.
Right.
They're
Yeah.
they're kind of just people passing through.
Mm.
So I find that interesting. I think we want things to be far more Hollywood and far more cut and dry than they are in reality.
Be really dramatic or something. Yeah,
Oh yeah.
so I actually, my house is definitely, it goes through like these ebb and flows of activity.
Hmm.
And so I've actually had a paranormal investigation here at my house before. It's pretty amazing. I
Wow.
refuse to do it at night, by the way.
Yeah. I don't
I'm
blame
such
you.
a
Don't blame you
wimp.
at all.
Yeah, it's actually, I mean, it was on my podcast like Halloween, but it was like maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And
Mhm.
I had Gavin on for Halloween, probably the year before that. Um,
Oh, lovely.
when he talked about Harvest, that book is terrifying. But
Oh yeah.
on the land that I live on, definitely was Native Americans. And I always think back to Poltergeist when they're like, why would they build a neighborhood on top of a burial ground?
Yeah.
My best friend, when she purchased her house, they were building in her neighborhood. I mean, they found like a 1,000-year-old skull of a native.
Wow.
I mean, this I guess is common because
Yeah.
they were so prominent here. How have you seen during your study and how it does affect if you're going to be living on a burial ground?
Yeah. I think there's been a lot of discourse around that, not just building houses on top of burial grounds, but building like train lines and different types of infrastructure through burial grounds. Because in the UK over the last few years, there's been this absolute farce of a train line called HS2, which is
Okay.
high speed 2. It's this high speed train that was supposed to connect the north and the south, and then obviously it's billions of pounds over budget. The the
Oh,
usual
it's not
rigmarole.
happening.
Yeah, and the track's getting shorter and shorter and shorter.
Oh,
But in the preparation for digging HS2 from London, they leveled a lot of buildings. A lot of houses have been bought up and demolished, but for no real reason now. A lot of things have got shorter. But in order to lay these new tracks and lay the new foundations for HS2, a lot of large portions of central London have been they've had these big archaeological sites set up. They've had these big archaeological sites set up on them, rather,
mhm.
and they've discovered several old graveyards, pre-cemeteries, these large burial grounds with intact coffins, with intact coffin plates. And so it's brought up a lot of discourse around what respect means and what
Back
burial
to
in
the bed.
perpetuity means, and kind of like directly addressing the different belief systems that have gone into each of those burials. So like you say, when like native burials, like Native American burials, would have very different ceremonies to, say, a lot of these I think were like 18th, 17th century English C of E burials in London. And so when you're talking about digging through these places and disinterring people or building on top of burial spaces, I think there are far greater conversations that we need to be having about that, because it seems to always just boil down to the practicalities of what do we do with the bodies? What is a, quote, respectful way to rebury these people whose identities have been lost? Because more often than not, their burial markers are long gone. They were wood, they rotted away if they ever existed. And so I think we're kind of losing a healthy interaction with the dead and the way we interact with burial spaces, even if they are ones that we're going to develop onto. So I think most places that report hauntings, that say, oh, I'm on burial sites, I'm on this, that's something they kind of add in after the fact. And the burial site may have been cleared, it may, very rarely in the UK, it may still be present, unless you're in a city. But I think a lot of the time, when it comes to places being haunted in a poltergeist, why would they build this house on a burial ground sort of thing? They're more of a rarity, they're more of a horror trope, whereas it's more of just quite a grim process of how houses are generally built and redeveloped now, of these people that were buried in a certain way are now an inconvenience. And their beliefs, the way in which they wanted to be buried and undisturbed is just another bit of red tape that that councils have to kind of cut through. And I have trouble, I'm very troubled with that.
Me too.
And yeah, the idea of what's appropriate. I think respect is a very, very dangerous word, because it can be weaponized so easily, especially when we talk about the dead and when we talk about the afterlife, because it's filled with inherent bias. The way that we interact with burial sites, the way we interact with
religion,
with graves, with religion, it all comes front loaded with our own life experiences and with our own ideas of how we'd want ourselves or our living loved ones to be treated. So I think it's a really problematic discussion that then when you introduce things like deviant burials, as we'd know them, as like non-standard burials, pre-19th century non-standard burials, or burials from people from marginalized communities of different religions, it's kind of the enemy of the modern world that wants everything to be neatly homogenized. So we just treat everyone the same and whack them in a field, and they should be happy that they're being reburied at all. So I think the bones under your house will be absolutely fine, because you're not going at them with a digger. But I think as soon as you start trying to rebury them, then you have to start having those really difficult conversations about, I've just picked up someone's femur, am I going to be haunted? Because I'd be far more inclined personally to mess about with someone when I'm dead if they were chucking my foot into a tray to be moved somewhere, rather than if they built a bungalow on top of me.
They do actually call out the natives. They do a ceremony, and I think that that's beautiful, that they still hold space for that, and their descendants, are coming to honor them, and that means something to them.
Yeah, I think absolutely having that space and having that openness to listen to peoples that really do matter is really important. And I feel like I can only really speak for the UK. Obviously, I'm not super hot on what's happening with the like tribal repatriations and things like that in the States, but certainly in the museum sector, there's a lot of really complicated and overdue conversations that are being had about the repatriation and the appropriate display of native ritual objects, human remains, things like that. And so while they're very, very complicated, because obviously being British, we've had centuries to go, I like that, I'm having that. So there's a lot of independent.
Do you feel like that is one of the conversations that would collectively heal some of these lost souls as well? Because I feel like for myself, learning true history
Mm,
telling the stories and giving
mm,
them voice and awareness
mm.
has healed so much within my body that I can imagine it would on the earth as well.
Absolutely. I feel that with the paranormal, especially, so
Yeah.
when wherever you're having discussions about, oh, a haunted skeleton, or oh, let me hold this, when we're talking about human remains, or when we're talking about lost souls, or even curses are so loaded with cultural bias that we completely lose the personhood, um,
Yeah.
which is kind of necessary to just be human. And I think that certainly in the paranormal world and in the world of paranormal investigation, it's something that is so frequently lost, whether they're objects in museums or objects in personal collections, or if
Yeah.
they're in burial spaces. Things related to the dead and important ritual objects are just distilled down now to their usefulness to us, and the usefulness visually in investigations. I've seen countless live streamed through social media paranormal investigations where they're entering burial sites, or they're entering museums or collections where there are human remains, there are tribal objects, ritual objects that are completely removed from their context and just held within cases or just within pseudo public spaces, but are then seen as just fair game. They're seen as public, um, public objects for whatever usage, and it's that usage that is incredibly dehumanizing. And I think that while that might make an excellent paranormal investigation, because you think, oh, I'm getting a lot of activity from this, or it's never within the context of I'm getting a lot of activity from this person, this object, because this person doesn't belong here, this object doesn't belong here, there's a lot of trauma here. And what are
Okay.
we going to do about that? There's no proactivity. We like the fear, we like the old school Hollywood, oh, this is an evil totem pole, oh,
Yeah.
this is a shrunken head. Shrunken heads, especially. So many of them were in the UK until a few years
Wow.
ago. And it takes so much to even acknowledge that we might have personal problems with the way that we interact with marginalized communities and indigenous populations, that to then even have a wider public discussion about, well, why do we feel entitled to treat these things in this way? It almost seems too complicated. Certainly in the paranormal field and in the field of paranormal investigation, there's a lot of very, I don't want to overstate it, start fights or anything, but I think there's a real lack of personhood and a real lack of acknowledgement
Yeah.
of the personhood of the dead. And while it's nice to have all your devices going off and saying, "Oh, I'm talking to this ancient tribal leader, this great Hindu figure who died in the UK," well, let's imagine they were a person. Let's imagine that they were a real person stood in front of us. What a shocking thing that would have been. And I think having that conversation with ourselves, certainly in the field of the paranormal, would revolutionize the way not only we talk to spirits and the way we approach spirits, but also the way we interact with one another. Because I do think the internet age, and certainly the social media age of the there's a really popular phrase, isn't there? The main character syndrome. The idea
Yeah.
that everything we do is by us, for us, and centered around us is just endemic. You see it everywhere. And when you take that mentality and you place it within a field where you're talking about souls, you're talking about burial, you're talking about grief, the most extreme feelings that
Yeah.
anyone could encounter, to then still center it around you and your experiences and what you can gain from that
Mm.
publicly, financially, reputationally, I think it's a bit of a cancer, really, in the spiritual world and the other worlds that are adjacent to that. And I do have a few problems,
Yeah. Me
certainly
too.
with those ways that the interactions have changed, especially in burial spaces. I really get on my soapbox about burial
No,
spaces.
I am so glad that you're speaking about that because I hate that. I hate that
Mm,
picking at, let's just pick at this energy and see if we can
mm,
get it to get angry enough so that we
yeah.
can get a reaction or pick at it so we get, something. I just think that's so disturbing, actually, because like you
Mm,
said, can we just imagine that maybe this soul is so traumatized and so stuck in this moment
mm.
that it's reliving? Can you
Yeah.
have some compassion for what once was? See, I think that's being an empath, right? We're able
Mm,
to connect with the energy of what's happening around you and to be able to sense that and then have an appropriate
mm.
reaction towards what you're sensing. And I know for myself, I grew up, as a child having to go into a room and reading the room. Is this going to be a good day for me, a bad day for me? What's
Yeah,
everybody's
yeah,
mood is everybody in? Almost like hyper aware,
yeah,
say, that
yeah,
you were able to then connect with the other side.
yeah. No, I absolutely get that same mentality of entering a room and going, right, you almost brace yourself. Be
Right.
like, okay, okay, let the wave come, and then we'll make an assessment of how this day
Right.
is going to go. Yeah, especially with when you're in a room full of people, regardless of what the situation is. If someone leaves a TV on in the background and
Hmm.
there's like that static, it's like an untuned TV, and you just have to kind of see how that static's working with you in that moment. I certainly feel like I enter a lot of social situations like that, and I certainly find it incredibly exhausting a lot of times, and in spaces as well, um, where you're entering with under paranormal investigative circumstances. If you feel like, oh no, this I am dead as a doornail, there's just absolutely nothing happening here, and you feel like you've let people down with you're not going along with it, you're not running
Right.
along with the same vibe. Whereas when things conversely, when things feel kind of like full TV of static, it can kind of be overwhelming to just
Have
be a
to, yeah.
person, to be a bystander. I'm not a practicing medium. I describe myself as an empath, and I describe myself as a sensitive. And I've certainly over the last couple of years, I've got the most from paranormal investigation and going into unusual spaces, shall we say, as if I'm going to an airport and I'm going to people watch. I'm just going to sit down with my
Yeah.
bag of duty free and I'm going to people watch and I'm going to see what happens. Because once you take a step back from being in that centered space, from being in the limelight, you can often get a far more nuanced and richer view spiritually of what's happening around you, and often pick up on things that people miss because they're so focused on being active, on pushing things forward. I think, like you said, when people want to just poke and poke and be really aggressive to a spirit to get any kind of interaction, because generally you're on a time limit, you've booked a space for 7 hours,
Mm.
you need something because people have paid a lot of money to be there, and it and when you watch that from a slightly removed standpoint, and you just see this poking, this aggression. And I've been in situations. One of my first ever paranormal investigations was someone who wasn't getting what they wanted and started shouting and being really aggressive to this male spirit who was said to hate women. So that felt great. That felt really nice to be seen in that environment. But as soon as that time's up, people put down the shutters and leave. And I'd struggle with that a bit, that you've picked and picked and you've pushed and pushed. Things have
Mm.
blown up, you've got what you wanted, and then you can just put that away in its little box and go home. It's like I struggle. I struggle with that. And I think that comes back to wanting to be a little, well, I suppose being an empath and just wanting everyone and everything to be in a positive space.
Yeah.
And I think that's conversely one of the most draining aspects of being involved in the paranormal, is this constant churning headspace afterwards of, well, who was that, how do they
Yeah.
feel about that, could I have done more, should I have been doing that, oh god, I feel awful, should I be doing this? And it's just this constant cycle afterwards of almost like mental self-harm and self-destruction. And then but you can't necessarily turn these impulses off so easily, I think. Yeah.
I love your perspective on this completely, and I 100% respect it and agree. I mean, I just feel like whenever I do confront any sort of paranormal anything, like my first instinct is to just be curious and investigate what's wrong,
Mm.
but more like what's the history here?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I think the history is so important. I know that you're very attracted to the Victorian history, and I'm
Mm.
curious about that. I feel like we're all kind of like, well, not all of us, but a lot of people are sometimes like really, really like attracted to like a certain era. Like I love medieval times. Have you had a past life regression, or do you know that maybe you had a past life during that time? Is that why you're so connected to it?
Well, I've had one as part of a group past
Okay.
life regression, and I'm due to have another one
Nice.
in a month or two. So I'm with someone
Great.
who I think
Okay.
is absolutely wonderful. But yeah, in that first regression, naturally there was a half a dozen Cleopatras, because there always is. You know, you can't move for ancient Egyptian leaders in regressions. But yeah, when I was regressed, I it was the most depressing regression. I was
I
expecting
can
maybe,
feel
a Victorian lady of the house, or something maybe a bit further back. Maybe I was a landowner. But no, when I was regressed, I saw myself as this woman in a very rural part of the UK. I feel like Norfolk sort of area, in this big field of wheat. And I was the wife of a miller,
Mm.
I think about early 19th century. And I was on my own in the fields, and I'd had several children, and all of them had been wiped out by disease. And I was just left with nothing except my husband, who was a miller called Isaac, and um, and just desolation, just empty fields. There was nothing else. It's a weird kind of vast emptiness. I
Mhm.
was I was really expecting something more,
Adventurous.
vivacious or exciting. Like, oh
Yeah.
yes, I was also in Egypt, but no, I was still in the UK. I was still in the UK, and I was
Well,
incredibly depressed.
one of
So,
mine, I was a reptilian, so maybe I'll have a really fun one. But
oh
I've had
well,
a
it's hoping. I'll report back. I'll report back if I do. Yeah. Oh, by
absolutely.
the way, I was a werewolf in Louisiana. Oh my God, it all makes sense.
Yeah,
But
right,
yeah, well,
exactly.
we'll see.
Around that same place. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. Your book, it's called Begotten. I
Hmm.
love that. And I would love to know, why you chose that title. Maybe that'll help explain a little bit about the book.
Well, Begotten it's a gothic novel.
Hmm.
It's a gothic novel, and I've tried to subvert a lot of the gothic traditions. So women's voices are really important to me, and centering female characters as not these weak little waifs that are simply waiting
Damsel
to
in
have.
distress. Yes.
Exactly. And within like the Victorian Gothic tradition, the key things were the explained supernatural. So everything in the end was all very neatly wrapped up as, oh well, after all, it wasn't supernatural, and now you've got a nice young husband to take you out of all of this nonsense. There were kind of the traditions to everything. And I thought, well, that's, although we've got this idea of a Gothic heroine, she's not really playing a great role in it. She's sort of a passenger in her own story, and she's foolish and credulous. But what if you were a woman, a modern woman in that environment? And so
Mhm.
Begotten kind of questions that. Can you ever trust your senses? Are things predestined? Can you ever have ownership over yourself? And it tells the story of a young woman returning home to this very isolated big house after she'd had quite a taste of a fabulous new life. And returning to that space after a death, she finds that she doesn't have control over the household anymore. And some spiritualists have come in and have said that they can help with grief. They can contact her deceased father, and they can kind of unite the household, but things aren't what they seem. And it plays a lot with the trustworthiness of one's senses, of one's place and role, and also of corruptive spaces. Like we said earlier, if you're in a space that's rotting, that's negative, that's grim, it just eats into everything, and it messes with your senses, and it messes with the way you interact with the world. And so Begotten's that story. It's a story of one woman's journey home, and whether or not ghosts are real, if what she's seeing is real, if her whole family has fallen apart in her absence. And it's not some great deep thinky, oh, this will take 60 years to dive through. It's very accessible. It's very accessible, but it was very important to me to elevate women's voices that were very much suppressed in the 19th century and in contemporary versions, I suppose, of neo-Gothic novels. There's no pathetic women here at all. There's just a lot of questions and a lot of pace, to it all.
My God, that sounds so good. Well, I'd rather be a Fiona than a Cinderella any day.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and sometimes, your Prince Charming isn't what he says he is.
No, he's
So
like
yeah,
Farquaad.
exactly. He's Farquaad with a crystal ball. So,
And I'd rather donkey than a steed.
yes.
So your book is
Well,
her story, and she's already passed and going to visit where she lived.
no, she's very much live,
Oh,
but she's returning home, but there's
oh.
so many questions within it because everything's from her perspective. We can't trust what she's saying because
Mm.
things aren't making sense. The
Oh.
house isn't working as an ordinary house would. She's saying she left and she had this wonderful life with a wonderful husband, but other people are saying that she never left the house. Other people are saying she can never leave. The ghosts are ever present, but it says a lot about whether ghosts are just people in sheets or ghosts are memories or ghosts are things that we create ourselves, and how we can create our own fears and our own ghosts when things aren't going our own way. So
Mm.
it messes with
I like that.
perception a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh gosh. I always feel like there's a lot of messing with perception though when you're in that space.
Oh,
So, I
absolutely.
mean,
Yeah.
when I've traveled and I've gone to different haunted locations, that are like, this is the most haunted house in America, this and that.
Mhm.
And I mean, yeah, it's always like, oh, take pictures, so you might catch something kind of thing. You might
Mm.
feel a dog licking your ankle or, see a man in a rocking chair, stuff like that.
Yeah.
It was in Louisiana. We went to the Myrtles plantation.
Hmm.
And really, it was very interesting because my experience actually didn't happen in the house and it didn't happen with anyone. I was walking outside in the live oaks, which are those really cool trees that are like
Oh, wow.
so
Yeah.
alive, right? And I was videotaping the trees as I walked because they were so magical. And all of a sudden, I'm humming this tune. And I have no idea what I was humming. I'd never heard that tune before. I was like asking everyone if they had ever heard that before. Someone suggested it sounded a little bit like Willy Wonka, but it wasn't. It was very specific. And years after, I end up hearing that tune while I was watching a movie. I was
Oh.
watching the movie Cabrini, which is
Hmm.
interesting because Mother Cabrini really was in Louisiana. I should see. I want to go back and do the history and see if she
Yeah.
was near the Myrtles plantation. Yeah, it was very interesting that I received. I've never experienced, receiving something like that in
Yeah.
humming.
That's amazing though. I think it's so fulfilling when you can continue to have so many different interactions with spaces
Yeah.
on a spiritual level, that it's not always, like you say, a dog licking your
Right.
ankle or something, or like a cat brushing by, or sometimes it's not tangible, and often it's a passing thought or a tune. Or I think they're arguably the more human and the more lasting, evidently, the more lasting impressions we can get from spaces and people. I think it's that opening yourself up to those possibilities and just being a blank slate wherever you go, because generally I believe the universe guides you to where you
Yes.
need to be, and sometimes that can just be a weird
Yeah.
looking tree and takes your life in a completely different direction.
I feel like everything in my journey, even that, end up
Hmm.
connecting to something, and sometimes you don't realize it at the time. Sometimes a dream ends up being like something 10 years later, something very significant. I feel like I can always connect something to all the
Mm.
paranormal experiences that I have. And I think sometimes we can overlook that the importance of that experience is coming forth for you to receive as in wisdom. So is that true for you?
Um, I think certainly over the last couple of years, I've worked on myself so much, and I've accepted that I'm on quite an intense personal journey, and I've gone down so many different avenues. But I think now I'm very discerning that when I try and do anything with spirit, or I'm in any kind of paranormal capacity, I make sure that I'm not going through the motions, that I'm not there as, oh, by the way, I'm here to do some ghost hunting or something like that. I think
checking all the boxes.
to change your language and to change your approach is really important, and that's the way you can get meaningful and very fulfilling interactions. But I think it's very, very easy if you're doing a large amount of paranormal investigations or events, a lot of public events, you can get so battered and so closed off to what's happening around you that you walk in completely mentally, spiritually zipped up, and you would miss 1,000 messages, you'd miss 1,000 nods because you're just burnt out spiritually. And I think the second that we realize that we can take a step back and we can listen to messages that are meant to be for us without putting ourselves at the forefront, without being the main character, I think that's the most exciting and the most rewarding place to be. And I certainly feel over the last year or so that I have been steered in little directions, and I would have missed that if I'd been closed off, or if I've been thinking, oh, I've got to get this deadline done, I've got to do this, because I'm terribly overworked at the best of times. But to then put your headspace separately and to say, okay, this is happening for a reason. Like for example, I went to a parapsychological conference last year. It's a bit adjacent to what I do. I'm far more on the historical and the literary side of things, certainly academically. And I thought, well, I'll go. I've got a paper, but largely I'll be there. I'll listen, and I'm just going to learn. And I met someone who was saying, I know you're wearing this particular ring. I know you're wearing this ring with onyx in it because you think it gives you protection. You're not giving yourself enough protection. You're not doing yourself justice. Read this book, and I'm going to give you something that you need to carry with you. And he had no idea what I was doing. He didn't know that I was, like, the next day I was going to go and film some paranormal TV show. But he said, you're going to need this really imminently. So read this book and keep this on you with what you're going to do next. And he gave me, it's a little talisman that was blessed by a Buddhist monk. And it's like a little wooden talisman on a red rope. He said, just keep it on you because you're going to need it.
Oh, sweet.
And I thought it was a lovely thing, generally, but also don't insult my rings, they're fabulous. But still, I thought, okay, this is, normally I might have just said, look, I've got a lot to read. I'm not really gonna do this, but I did, and I kept the thing with me, kept the talisman with me, and I read the books. And then what I then went into was far more extreme than what I was anticipating work-wise, certainly spiritually with the whole paranormal angle. And I feel like if I hadn't have been pushed down that more magical and protective avenue, I was going to bring something really negative back with me, because I underestimated how severe that situation was that I was putting myself into. So I think listening to those little nudges is not only a way to enrich your life and to put yourself in the new places that you're supposed to be, but there's a really strong protective voice around a lot of us that comes to us in really strange ways. And I think we'd be fools to dismiss it. Doesn't matter if you've got lots of work on. If someone tells you to read the book, read the damn book, because it's for the best,
Read the damn book. It's called Begotten.
Yes, do. Read the damn book, or I'm going to haunt you.
Right. So is it available to purchase now?
Yeah, you can get it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Waterstones, everywhere where books exist. You can order it in, and it's a fun, fast-paced, spooky read. So I hope people enjoy it.
Well, thank you so much, Kate. I really respect your work. I really do. I love the way you look at it. I can feel how much compassion you have and respect for the other side, and I love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And
yes,
you have a website that anyone can go and check out?
Yeah, I have. Well, my blog is burialsandbeyond.com.
Okay.
So that is like everything from folklore to visits to graves. I do a lot of stuff with graves. And my personal website is katecherrell.com. So there's two options there, but I'm all over social media, generally under Burials and Beyond.